Alexander Titov, who is a lecturer at Queen's University Belfast. He joins me now live from Belfast. Alexander, what do you make of this statement from Prigozhin 2 days after this revolt? Is this an indication that the conflict in Russia is still far from over?
Well, I think he's trying to save whatever he can from his reputation in the eyes of both Russian public and possibly President Putin, although I think it's far too late for that. One thing he didn't mention in his address, which was containing all the usual statements from Prigozhin that, I'm the only good fight. The Russian army is crap, and I would have done so much better if it wasn't for the Shoigu and so forth, and that I didn't started it and they started it. One thing he didn't mention about it, people love me, etc., is that he didn't mention Putin's calling him a traitor, and that's a fundamental problem for Prigozhin now, that he has played his card, it failed. Putin will never forgive him for that anymore, and he is not has any power left within Russia as long as Putin is in charge. And I don't think how he can get himself out of this now.
It seems the criminal investigation against him is continuing despite the initial reports of that agreement that the Belarusian president negotiated that would have that criminal investigation dropped. Did it seem, though, too good to be true, rather unlikely that Putin would let Prigozhin go quietly? And what do you think the future holds for the Wagner chief?
Well, I don't particularly, if I was Prigozhin, I wouldn't be very optimistic about my future because his main trump card was control over the Wagner group. I don't think he can control them now from Belarus if that's where he is now, while they are all stationed in Russia. I think the Wagner group has shown themselves to be a threat to the regime. I don't think that Putin can afford to keep them intact the way they were, so there will be some form of reorganization and disbursement coming. I don't think Prigozhin can do anything about it. I mean, it's all these statements are all very well. I don't know how long they will tolerate him if he continues in the same vein, kind of forming himself as this opposition to the Russian authorities. His future in Belarus will be short-lived. So he has to be very careful what he says and what he does from now on.
Now that a few days have passed since the revolt, I'd like to hear your reaction in hindsight to the events of this weekend. Do you think that this was inevitable?
No, it was not inevitable, and I think it was a choice by Prigozhin himself. And you can see that his way of thinking about it developing since February, at least, when he's spat with the Ministry of Defense becoming increasingly public, vocal, and extreme language and extreme images being used. And he's been accusing them of being incompetent traitors and calling them names in public repeatedly. Threatening to withdraw, making ultimatums, threatening to pull back from the front line, and so forth and so forth. So, it was increasingly obvious that he's been losing the thread on how to behave yourself in Russian politics. Because one thing is a spat with with other groups, but you first of all don't do it publicly, and secondly, you never move against the top authority, Putin, and he kind of clearly thought of himself being beyond the normal rules, which Putin encouraged him to thinking about, I guess, without realizing how far Prigozhin would take it. And then when it's taken, the whole thing fell apart for him very rapidly for Prigozhin. And as I said, I don't see any way back for him now.
Why do you think we haven't heard from Putin other than the initial address to the nation on Saturday, where he came out and was visibly angry? I know that we have had a video address from Putin today, but he didn't mention the revolt over the weekend. Well, why do you think we haven't heard anything from the Russian leader?
Well, I think that there is a kind of a large-scale reorganizations are coming. First of all, they are working out plans what to do with the actual Wagner group, which is proved themselves to be uncontrollable and a threat to central authorities, something they need to deal with. I think that are working very hard plans for what to do with them, what to do with Prigozhin, what to do with the other security forces which missed the plot, because it was a plot. It wasn't a spontaneous thing, as Prigozhin claims, that that's just suddenly moving after they've been bombed. That's we know now that there has been reports in America that they've been preparing it for at least a week, days, if not weeks in advance, and the movement prove it. It's not something you can do just on the spur of the moment. March to Moscow with full columns, and bottom line, sort of, we will see it. So it will be a slow-moving process. I don't think there's anything for Putin to address now. I think he's feel confident. We will see more things on as things develop, probably in coming weeks rather than days, in terms of what happens to Prigozhin, what happens to Wagner.
All right, Alexander Titov joining us from Belfast. Thank you.